Hello, Gary Stearman with today's Prophecy in the News update. It's July 12th, 2010, and the calendar, of course, is flying by. Today, have a special treat for you in studio. Doug Woodward, author of Are We Living in the Last Days? Now, we at Prophecy in the News have featured this book for a while now. Doug, welcome.
And, Thank you. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you, and I love your book, Are We Living in the Last Days? The thing I like about it is the way you pack so much information into so little space.
Well, I try to also set certain levels so that if you are more of a casual reader, you can just read the mainline material. Mm-hmm. If you like to dig into the historical details, you can look at the footnotes. And if you're interested in some of the themes that I go deeper into, you can read the little sidebars, which I call deep dives, and go into those.
You've got, I see a deep dive here in a couple of pages, 52, 53. What did the Council of Nicaea, what the Council of Nicaea was actually charged to do? Now, you may not be interested in that at all. You just thumb right on by.
That's
but
right.
If you are, you can read it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I exactly right. I cover some little-known things that, for instance, the fact that the virgin birth was actually a key doctrine of the church to emphasize the humanity of Christ. Whereas in the 20th century, it became a key doctrine of the fundamentalists to emphasize the divinity of Christ.
Wow.
Funny how history changes.
It is funny how history changes, but the Bible always remains current.
It does. It does.
And it takes quite an author to do that, let me tell you. Are we living in the last days, Doug?
Well, there's certainly reasons to suspect that we are. Probably the key prophecy that tells us that the last days are probably upon us is, of course, the return of Israel physically to its land. And since 1948, things have begun to take place and percolate, if you will, in such a way that it continues to reinforce the probability that we are living in the last days.
So, taking Israel, and by the way, that's kind of a new idea in the long history of the church.
It is.
The church spent many centuries sort of doubting that Israel would ever return.
That's absolutely true. Of course, the two, you might say, Jewish factions in the first century went at odds when it says, I think in Eusebius, that the Jews, as was their custom, gathered firewood for the stake of Polycarp. And so it caused the two clans, if you will, to break apart. And since then, the church for almost 1800 years has predominantly taken the view that the church replaces Israel, that they lost their chance, that God has turned his back on them. And it's only been in the last, about 160 years that Bible-believing Christians have tended to see that God has two plans, one for Israel and one for the church.
Well, and this brings to mind something that's kind of interesting, and we don't often think of it, but premillennial dispensationalists, such as myself, people who are looking for the imminent return of the Lord Jesus Christ, tend to be a minority, a numerical minority in the church. And this is a kind of an oddity. You would think, wow, this is what we believe, and everyone should want to believe that way.
Right. Well, of course, through perhaps almost 250 years of the effect of the Enlightenment, of naturalism, that only the things that happen in the world are always just the cause and effect of natural processes. If you believe those things, then you rule out the possibility for prophecy and for miracles and so forth. And so the history of theology, at least the mainline denominations and so forth, has been a history of accommodation. How can we still find religious value in the Bible, even though the Bible is ridden with these things called miracles? And so it's been difficult for liberalism to find a meaningful way to articulate the importance of religion or spirituality in light of the fact that the Bible testifies to these things called miracles.
You know, it's kind of fascinating that the church has turned today, even as it was prophesied. The Laodicean church, I think, is growing today, and that church is preoccupied with social justice. That is, improving the lot of the lower classes in society and going forth.
Correct.
And maybe redistributing the wealth and so forth.
Yes.
And prophetically, that was destined to happen.
Yeah, certainly the concept of utopianism, as we sometimes call it. Even our country was founded, at least partially, by Francis Bacon and the Virginia Company and the Jamestown Colony, and it was very much built on Platonic ideas of utopia.
Yes.
And one of the fascinating things I find interesting is that that you had that colony forming in the south, while you had the Pilgrims and the Puritans forming in the north. And of course, Thomas Bradford was their leader, who talked about the shining city on a hill, and that was his goal. And yet, for 400 years in America, the wheat and the tares have sort of grown together. And unfortunately, perhaps in our time, the tares have gotten taller than the wheat.
And is that not one of the signs of the last days?
I believe that it is. I think that the lack of awareness of the biblical testimony as to what the meaning of Christianity is in fact very much one of the signs of the last days. We can certainly talk in particular about things that are happening in the Middle East. We can talk about a variety of issues associated with our administration and the current administration in the government of Israel, and whether or not it's going to lead to wars that could precipitate perhaps even the final and the great war that the Bible describes in the book of Revelation, the Battle of Armageddon.
You read this book, you're going to find out that Doug has a mind for detail, and by the way, for connecting ideas that other people might not think to connect together. And that's the kind of the spirit of this book. Are we living in the last days? Years for 1895. Call our 800 number, and that's 1895 plus shipping and handling. And of course, we will include a copy, the latest copy of Prophecy in the News magazine, so that you can see what we're all about. We hope you, if you're not a subscriber, we hope you'll subscribe to Prophecy in the News magazine. Tomorrow, on this very same time slot, we're going to be talking about Doug's second book, Decoding Doomsday, which jumps off into the deep waters.
Yes, you might say it gets into some more of the more intriguing issues that won't be quite as common for those students of biblical prophecy. But I'm a student of history, and I find it fascinating to see the effects of both good forces and evil forces, and how that plays itself out in our history. And there's lots of lessons to be learned as a result of that.
Well, you know, I've always said that a good expositor of the Bible approaches the Bible historically and grammatically. In other words, looking at the text in great detail to discern exactly what it says. And I think that's kind of the spirit in which you're coming at Scripture.
Oh, very much so. And certainly I think in terms of these books, I try in the book about the last days to provide some history for the reader to understand why it is that there are differing views about the second coming of Christ.
Plus the little boxes. I love
the little boxes.
The little boxes.
Yes.
And right at the end of the chapter, we find a little box that says recapping the key points covered in this chapter. And you can just go right through them. And it's just a marvelous study aid. I love the way this book's put together. Are we living in the last days? And you would say, yes, indeed.
I would say that we are.
Okay.
I would.
Doug Woodward, thanks for being with us here at Prophecy in the News. And we've got to talk again.
I look forward to many enjoyable conversations with you, Gary, in the future. It'll be both a privilege and a pleasure.
I wish you could have been a mouse on the wall off camera when Doug and I talked about various things that came to our minds. A fascinating guy, and you'll find his books equally fascinating. Gary Stearman wishing you a great day in the Lord, and as always, keep looking up.